Ma'am, I need you to step off HOA property right now. Those were the first words out of the deputy's mouth as he climbed Harper Barrett's porch steps, one hand resting near his radio, the other held out in that cautious, trained way officers used when they were trying to look calm in front of a crowd. Red and blue lights rolled across the cedar posts, over the hanging fern basket Elena had planted years ago, and across the chipped white paint on the rocking chair where Harper sat with black coffee in one hand and pruning gloves in the other. The flashing colors made her front yard look like somebody else's emergency. Patricia Henderson stood 2 steps behind him, pearls at her throat, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, though the sun had barely cleared the pines, and a white clipboard hugged to her chest like a court order. Her lipstick was too bright for that hour. Her expression was bright too, the kind of smile a person wore when they believed procedure itself was a weapon. "There she is," Patricia said, voice carrying toward the road where a few Maple Hollow residents had stopped their golf carts to watch. "That is the non-compliant owner. I told dispatch she keeps refusing to vacate common frontage. This has been ongoing hostility." Harper heard the word owner and almost laughed. Almost. The deputy looked young enough to still get carded at the feed store. His name tag read, C. Morrow. Sweat had already darkened the edge of his collar, even though it was still cool enough to see breath over the lake. He glanced from Patricia to Harper, then to the trimmed opening in the hedge line down by the gravel drive, and his brow pinched with the first sign that he knew this call was not going to fit neatly in a report. "Ma'am," he said again, this time more formal, "I have a complaint of trespass and disorder. She says this parcel is under HOA control." Patricia shifted forward on her heeled sandals, sank a little in damp soil, and lifted the clipboard so Harper could see a printed map in a cheap plastic sleeve. "It is under HOA control. The board voted 6 months ago to designate this section as scenic access," she was notified repeatedly. Harper set her coffee on the porch rail and looked at the map from where she sat. Wrong scale, wrong survey date. Somebody had highlighted straight lines across curved ground and called it authority. From the roadside came the soft electric whine of a golf cart slowing to a stop. One neighbor whispered, "This is getting serious." Another answered, "She called 911 over bushes." They were trying to whisper, but sound traveled across water and gravel in the morning. Patricia raised her voice for the audience. "She threatened to move my event vendors with stakes and tools in hand. I felt unsafe. We all did." Harper looked down at the wooden survey stakes near her boot, each one tied with orange tape and set exactly on her side of the line before sunrise. Unsafe. That was the word people used when facts were not going their way. Deputy Morrow cleared his throat. "Miss Barrett, if this is a civil boundary dispute, we can separate parties and document." "It is not a dispute," Patricia cut in. "She is trespassing on HOA-managed lake frontage and obstructing a permitted setup. Ask her where she thinks she is standing." Harper lifted her eyes to Patricia then, finally giving her full attention. Patricia's face was flushed high along the cheekbones, not with fear, not with confusion. With performance. She had an audience and a script, and no intention of checking either one against county records. "Ask her to produce any exemption paperwork right now," Patricia said. "She never has it. She hides behind stories." Deputy Morrow shifted his weight. Behind him, the cruiser lights kept rotating, washing blue over Patricia's clipboard, then red over the polished pearl buttons on her cardigan. "Miss Barrett, do you have documents available?" Harper did not stand. She did not even lean forward. She just picked up her coffee, took one measured sip, and spoke in the same tone she used with contractors who poured footings a quarter-inch off grade. "Deputy, before you move me, call your supervisor and county mapping." Patricia barked a short laugh. There it is. Delay, deflection. Harper ignored her. "Call county mapping and ask for the current plat overlay tied to parcel 17B, Barrett Land Trust Utility Corridor, and the grandfathered non-HOA tract bordering Mirror Point. Then ask dispatch for the easement file attached to Maple Hollow pump access." Deputy Morrow stared at her for a beat. The crowd at the road went quiet, as if everyone had leaned forward at once without moving. Patricia snapped her clipboard down against her palm. "That is irrelevant jargon. This is HOA enforcement." "Ma'am?" the deputy said carefully to Patricia. "Let me handle the call." "I am handling it," Patricia shot back. "I am HOA president. This has been reviewed." Harper watched the deputy's face settle into that neutral expression officers wore when two adults started pulling them in opposite directions. He took a step down from the porch and spoke into his shoulder mic, low and fast, asking for supervisor response and county mapping verification. His words were clipped, procedural, almost apologetic. Patricia stood rigid while he spoke, then turned her sunglasses toward Harper. "You really think sitting there with coffee makes you untouchable?" Harper picked up the pruning gloves from her lap and smoothed one thumb across the worn leather seam. "No, ma'am," she said. "Paperwork does that." Patricia's mouth tightened. "You have no right to that lane, that view, or that frontage." The deputy ended his radio call and came back up one step, not all the way this time. "Supervisor is en route. County mapping is pulling records now." "Unbelievable," Patricia said. "You're entertaining this? We have guests arriving in 45 minutes. Chairs are already staged. This woman is sabotaging a community event." Harper followed the line of Patricia's arm toward the side yard. White folding chairs had been set in neat rows on damp grass, their legs pressed into ground that had never belonged to Maple Hollow. Not for 1 minute, not on paper, not in memory. A florist van idled near the entrance, hazard lights blinking. Two men in black polos were unloading an arch wrapped in silk flowers and looking anywhere but at the porch. Deputy Morrow rubbed his jaw. "Nobody's unloading anything else until this is verified." Patricia rounded on him. "Do you understand liability? The HOA has permits." "Then we'll verify those too," he said. For the first time, Patricia looked less polished and more frantic. Her voice rose a notch. "This whole stretch is common lake frontage. Everybody knows it. We improved it. We maintain it." Harper set the gloves back in her lap, fingers resting over the stitching Elena had repaired one spring when the palm split. She looked past Patricia to the hedge opening where fresh cuts still showed pale and wet along the branches. 42 feet of living wall trimmed into a corridor because Patricia wanted a better photo angle for strangers. The deputy noticed Harper staring and followed her gaze. "Was that hedge cut today?" Patricia answered before Harper could speak. "It was trimmed for safety and view compliance under Section 4. "By who?" "By management direction." The deputy looked back at Harper. "Did you authorize hedge work?" Harper met his eyes. "No." Patricia lifted her chin. "Authorization is not required when it obstructs designated common sight lines." Deputy Morrow let that statement sit in the air. He did not agree, did not disagree, just filed it away. Professional, careful, not eager to become part of someone else's power struggle. A second cruiser turned onto the gravel lane, slower than the first, no siren. Just that crunch of tires that sounded louder than it should in morning quiet. Patricia straightened instantly, performing confidence again. Harper watched her and thought how small a clipboard looked when facts started arriving in real time. She took another sip of coffee, while the lights played across the porch and the lake beyond, steady enough to feel her own pulse settle. She had spent 26 years in county engineering offices, where people yelled over culverts, boundaries, flood maps, and access roads. Noise never moved a line. Volume never changed a survey marker. Records did. Deputy Morrow stepped aside as the supervisor got out, older, broad-shouldered, hat brim low against the glare. Patricia started walking toward him before his door closed, talking fast, pointing at Harper's yard, at the chairs, at the hedge, at the world she had convinced herself she controlled. Harper stayed seated in the rocker, gloves in her lap, coffee warm in her hand, and waited for the paperwork to catch up to the shouting. The supervisor had just reached the bottom step when Harper lifted her cup again and watched Patricia talking with both hands, chopping the air like she could slice county lines into shape by force. Deputy Morrow stood half-turned between them, trying to keep the morning from tipping into a circus, while beyond the hedge opening the wedding chairs sat in rows on wet grass that still held tire marks from the florist van. Everything about the scene looked formal and foolish at the same time, like somebody had dropped a country club brochure into the middle of a property survey. Now, hold up. To make sense of why Harper stayed in that old rocker while lights flashed on her porch rails, it helped to stop right there and step back before the supervisor opened his mouth. The shouting mattered. The chairs mattered. The cut hedge mattered. But none of it was the real engine of what was about to happen. The real engine sat in filed records, trust language, and one agreement Patricia Henderson had been benefiting from for years without bothering to read past the first page. And what happened next would shake this whole little lake community to its roots. Harper knew that before anyone else on that gravel lane did. She knew it when Patricia announced common frontage, like she was naming a kingdom. She knew it when Deputy Morrow asked for documents with that careful tone officers use when they sense two stories and only one can survive contact with paper. She even knew it when she noticed the florist crew avoiding eye contact and inching their dolly back toward the van. Because working people can smell legal trouble the way ranch dogs smell rain. They may not know the statute number, but they know when somebody is standing where they do not belong. The odd part was how ordinary the morning felt from Harper's chair. Coffee tasted like coffee. The boards beneath her boots creaked in familiar places. The lake sat calm and silver beyond the pines, same as it had the morning before and the morning before that. Patricia was the one burning through energy, voice rising, posture stiff, sunglasses flashing, clipboard lifting and dropping like a gavel she wished would make things true. Harper had spent a long career watching loud certainty run headfirst into field-verified facts. It was never graceful. From where she sat, she could see the trimmed channel carved through the hedge, 42 feet of raw-cut branches where privacy used to be seamless and green. The cuts were clean in some spots and ragged in others, which told her the trimmer blade had been rushed and grabbed when it hit thicker growth near the old corner post. She had noticed that detail at first glance. Engineers notice line quality. They notice edge conditions. They notice where impatience shows up in material. Patricia thought the hedge was a decoration. Harper saw evidence. The supervisor, Sergeant Harlan, was still listening to Patricia at the foot of the steps in that patient, stone-faced way that revealed nothing. He nodded once, looked toward the side yard, and then toward the road, and then up to Harper on the porch. No accusations, no assumptions, just sequence. He had done enough rural calls to know the difference between a threat and a turf war dressed up as public safety. Harper gave him a polite nod and waited, because there was no benefit in racing anyone to the finish line. She had already made the one request that mattered. Call mapping, call for the overlay, pull the easement file. The rest was timing. Her pulse stayed even. Her breathing stayed even. Patricia's did not. If a person had walked up right then and asked who held control, most folks might have pointed to the woman in pearls with a board title and a stack of printed notices. It looked that way on the surface. Patricia had signs, stationery, committee language, and a habit of speaking as if every sentence had already been approved in a meeting. What she did not have was jurisdiction over Harper's tract, ownership of the access corridor she was standing on, or authority to use fear words like hostile and armed to hustle deputies into enforcing a private fantasy. She had procedure, but she had it without foundation. Harper had foundation. She also had patience, and that morning, patience was doing more work than anger ever could. Let me take you back to how this started. Because Harper Barrett did not come to that porch by accident, and she did not learn line law from internet arguments. She was 52 years old that spring, retired from county civil engineering after 26 years of drainage plans, access permits, slope failures, culvert fights, and long meetings where a quarter-inch on a map could decide whether a family flooded or stayed dry. She was not flashy. Folks in Cedar Ridge mostly knew her as the woman who kept her tools clean, her words straight, and her porch light on for neighbors driving late. Her professional habits came from a lifetime of learning that ground has memory, and paper should match it. She had started as a field tech in her 20s, measuring ditch grades with a sunburned neck and a clipboard nobody respected until her numbers turned out right. She worked up through inspections, then plan review, then project sign-off. Contractors who bluffed got corrected. Developers who tried to squeeze setbacks got denied. Farmers who needed practical solutions got practical solutions. By the time she retired, she had a reputation for being fair and very hard to fool. The land itself reached back farther than her career. Her 6.8 acres at Mirror Point had been in the Barrett family long before Maple Hollow Estates had a gate sign or a website. Her grandfather, Otis Barrett, bought the tract when Cedar Ridge was still 2 feed stores, 1 hardware counter, and a church whose bell worked only if you pulled the rope by hand. He built the first cedar fence himself, post by post, and set the house square to morning light because he said a home ought to wake with the sun, not with the highway. When Harper's parents died in a winter wreck on State Route 19, Otis raised her in that house with practical kindness and strict routines. Boots by the door, tools back where they belong, pay bills before you buy comforts, read what you sign. She learned to set a level before she learned to drive. She learned where every corner marker sat on that acreage before she learned algebra. Otis did not romanticize land. He stewarded it. That difference stayed with her. 31 years before the deputies rolled up her driveway, she and Otis planted the privacy hedge that later became the center of Patricia's obsession. It took them 2 weekends and more labor than either admitted out loud. Harper dug in red clay until her palms blistered. Otis set string line and spacing pegs with surveyor care, muttering that straight work looked simple only after it was done right. They watered those starts through 2 brutal summers, replaced the weak ones, and shaped the growth into a living wall that held wind, filtered road noise, and gave the house a sense of shelter without shutting out the sky. By the 2nd week after planting, Harper had named sections of that hedge by habit rather than design: North Bend, Gate Corner, Elena's Line, and Pump Side. Years passed, storms came and went, and those names stuck. The hedge became more than vegetation. It became memory indexed by place. The legal status of the property was just as solid as the roots. Harper's parcel sat outside HOA authority under a grandfathered non-HOA, exception recorded when Maple Hollow annexed neighboring pasture. Fee simple title remained with her, unencumbered by HOA bylaws, architectural committees, or view corridor policies drafted years later by people who liked order as long as it flowed one direction. She had the recorded exemption. She had the boundary survey. She had every revision filed. What most Maple Hollow residents never understood was the second layer, the one that mattered when pressure dropped and fire hydrants needed flow. Through the Barrett Land Trust, Harper also owned the narrow utility strip running along the old service lane and the pump easement connecting the subdivision's irrigation and emergency fire flow feed to the lake intake. Not the pumps themselves, not the subdivision's internal pipes, the corridor and access rights that made them lawful and serviceable. The arrangement existed under a master agreement drafted to let the development function without condemning family land. And it included very plain conditions about vegetation tampering, access misuse, and misrepresentation of boundaries. Patricia had relied on that arrangement since the day Maple Hollow opened lots. Her sprinklers, her landscaped entrances, her community flower beds, even the hydrant pressure she bragged about in board newsletters, all depended on rights granted by the same trust she kept calling irrelevant. That was the irony sitting quietly under her heels while she performed authority on Harper's side yard. 3 days before the confrontation on the porch, Harper had pulled the complete file from her steel cabinet and laid it out at the kitchen table in ordered stacks. Trust instrument, recorded plats, utility and access master agreement, amendment pages, compliance correspondence, and still frames from the motion camera at 6:12 a.m., showing Patricia with an electric trimmer at the Hedge line. She had labeled tabs in block print and handed copies to counsel by noon. No drama, no speeches, just sequence and proof. Back at the porch in the flashing morning, Sergeant Harlan finally started up the steps, boots thudding once on each board, and stopped at a respectful distance from Harper's chair. He removed his sunglasses, glanced at Deputy Morrow, then at Patricia, then at Harper's coffee cup and gloves, taking in the whole picture the way experienced officers do when they know one wrong assumption can light a fuse. "Miss Barrett," he said, calm and even. "County mapping is returning records now. While we wait, do you have the governing documents you referenced?" Harper reached down beside the rocker to the weathered leather satchel she had set there before sunrise, unsnapped the brass buckle, and rested her hand on the top folder without pulling it out yet. She looked at the sergeant, not at Patricia. "I do," she said. "And once you read page 4 of the master agreement, this setup crew is going to need a new venue." Patricia made a small choking sound behind him, like she wanted to interrupt, but had not decided which sentence would save her. Sergeant Harlan lifted one hand without turning around. The kind of gesture that asked for silence, and usually got it. Harper kept her hand on the folder and felt the edge of the paper press into her palm, steady and square. It grounded her. So did the smell of cedar warmed by early sun and lake water and coffee gone slightly bitter in the cup. When she slid the folder out, a loose sticky note drifted free and landed against her knee. Elena's handwriting, blue ink, all caps, same as always. "Trim North Bend lightly. Leave the birds a little cover." Harper stared at it for half a breath before tucking it back under the clip. Nobody else on that porch would have noticed. To everybody else, it was just paper. To her, it was a hand reaching across 4 years. The sergeant waited. Deputy Morrow waited. Even Patricia, for one rare second, stopped talking. Harper passed over the first packet and said, quiet as ever, "Before you read page 4, you should understand why the hedge matters to me beyond the boundary line." She did not say it for sympathy. She said it because facts had roots, and this one started long before Maple Hollow put up a sign. Her parents died when she was 10, on black ice outside Claremore, headed home from a late shift and a school fundraiser they had both promised not to miss. Folks in Cedar Ridge brought casseroles and awkward hugs and all the usual words people use when there aren't any useful ones. Otis Barrett did not bring words. He brought structure. He moved her into the back bedroom, set out clean work boots one size too big, and taught her how to keep moving with grief instead of letting it pin her to a chair. By the spring after the funeral, he had her carrying survey tape and reading stake flags by color. Red for utilities, orange for temporary line, blue for water. "Ground doesn't care how sad we are," he told her once while they reset a leaning fence post after a storm. "It still has to drain right. Cattle still need a gate that swings. Work first, then cry if you need." It sounded hard when he said it. Years later, she understood it as kindness in work clothes. She met Elena Ruiz at 23 in the county office hallway. Both of them irritated at the same copier, and both refusing to admit it was out of toner because they were too proud to ask for help. Elena was a permit technician then, sharp-eyed and fast with numbers, with a laugh that carried from one end of a building to the other. They built a life the same way they built everything else. Piece by piece, no drama, no borrowed money they could not repay, no promises they did not intend to keep. When Otis's knees started failing, Elena learned hedge pruning from him in the same patient, old-school way he taught Harper. String line first. Step back 10 feet and check symmetry. Never shear in heat stress. Leave shelter pockets for wrens in late nesting season. The three of them spent Saturdays side by side, clipping, raking, arguing politely about angles, ending every session with sweet tea on the porch and Elena teasing Otis about his devotion to tools older than both women combined. The hedge became ritual before either of them called it that. In Elena's last healthy year, they trimmed every first Saturday of April just after sunrise, when the dew still held to the lower leaves and the lake took on that silver skin that made Mirror Point look wider than it was. Harper wore old canvas gloves. Elena wore the bright yellow pair she swore were lucky even after they faded to mustard. They talked about ordinary things while they worked, grocery lists and roof repairs, and whether the county would ever pave the washboard stretch near the feed store. Marriage, for them, lived in those ordinary conversations, not declarations. Then came the pancreatic diagnosis, fast and cruel in the way that disease often is when it means business. By the second month of treatment, Elena could not manage the trimmer, so she sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt and pointed with 2 fingers while Harper worked slowly along the line. "A little lighter there," she would say. "Leave that one. Finch nest." Even in pain, she noticed birds first. By late autumn of that year, Harper was trimming alone. She still set out Elena's gloves on the porch rail each spring. She still paused at North Bend where the sticky note had first been written. She still left cover pockets for wrens. Not because anyone would inspect her, and not because a handbook required it, but because love settles into routines long after people are gone. Cutting that hedge without permission was not a cosmetic trespass to her. It was vandalism against memory. The sergeant's expression changed almost imperceptibly as he listened. Not pity, not performance, just recognition that this was not 2 neighbors arguing over curb appeal. Deputy Morrow glanced toward the fresh-cut corridor and then back to the folder in his hands. Patricia shifted her weight, pearls bright against her throat, impatient with context, because context made her less central. Harper continued, voice even. "My grandfather and my wife both helped shape that line. That's why I documented every cut, every season, every maintenance entry in these logs. I can show dates, photos, and notes for 31 years. Nobody from Maple Hollow asked before opening a corridor through 42 feet of it. A breeze moved up from the water and lifted the corner of one page. In the side yard, a florist ribbon broke loose from the arch frame and skated across the grass like a pale snake before snagging on a chair leg. Somewhere down the lane, a mockingbird started up on a fence post, bold and repetitive. The morning stayed ordinary while the human part of it twisted. Sergeant Harlan nodded once. "I appreciate the background, Ms. Barrett. Let's walk through the records in order." Harper handed over the maintenance log, then the motion camera stills, then the agreement tabs. Process first, emotion second. That was Otis's training, and Elena's too. As the officers read, her mind tracked backward another 8 years, to the first bulldozers on the old Carter pasture and the beginning of Maple Hollow Estates, when everyone still used the phrase "new neighbors" and meant it kindly. The subdivision arrived with clean renderings, marketing banners, and promises about tasteful growth near the lake. Most of Cedar Ridge shrugged and said development was coming one way or another. Harper said the same. She had signed enough plan reviews in her career to know resistance without strategy was just noise. The first time Patricia Henderson drove up Harper's lane, she came smiling in a wide-brimmed hat and pressed white capris. No clipboard yet, no enforcement language, just a basket of muffins from the Maple Hollow Welcome Committee, and a practiced warmth that sounded almost sincere. She introduced herself as HOA president, talked about preserving community standards, asked about mailbox paint palettes and coordinated fencing options, and kept glancing past Harper at the hedge line as if measuring something in her head. Harper had invited her to stand in the shade and have iced tea. People could disagree and still be civil. Patricia said, "We're trying to build harmony out here. Shared look, shared values, shared access where possible." Harper answered, "I appreciate that. My parcel is grandfathered outside the association, so I won't be joining. But I'm always happy to be a good neighbor." Patricia's smile tightened for 1 second, and then returned. "Of course, we can still align aesthetically." Harper gave a small nod. "I keep my place up." That was true then and true now. Gravel drive graded, ditches clear, porch rail repaired when it needed repair, not when trends changed. She did not live rough and call it authenticity. She lived orderly and called it stewardship. 3 weeks later, Maple Hollow held a meet and greet by their stone entrance and sent paper invitations across Cedar Ridge, including to non-members. Harper went for 20 minutes, shook hands, listened to a presentation about landscaping covenants and Lakeview preservation goals, and quietly left before the committee's sign-up sheet reached her. She was polite to everyone. Nobody had grounds to call her difficult. At this point in the story, if this reminds anybody of a neighborhood they know, where friendliness arrives with forms attached, "Where are you watching from?" Drop your city below. Cedar Ridge was not unique. It just got louder than most. During that first season, Patricia kept things cordial. She waved from her golf cart. She dropped off a printed newsletter at Harper's Gate with events listed in cheerful fonts. Spring potluck, yard of the month nominations, shoreline cleanup day. Harper attended the cleanup and brought extra trash bags. She skipped the votes. The arrangement held, but small comments started appearing, each one minor enough to dismiss on its own. "Your hedge is beautiful, but it does block the long lake line from our upper loop." Some residents are asking whether non-member parcels can coordinate edge heights for visual continuity. "We'd love to include your frontage in community vistas one day." Always a smile, always a soft tone, always that word community used like a crowbar wrapped in velvet. Harper answered the same way every time. "I hear you. My boundaries and rights are recorded. I'll maintain my property to county code and my own standards." By early October of Maple Hollow's second year, Patricia had started carrying a binder when she visited, color-tabbed, thick with bylaws that did not apply to Harper's tract. She would stand at the gate in sunglasses and mention informal compliance opportunities, then hand over flyers as if they were notices. Harper accepted the paper, read it, filed it, and changed nothing that did not need changing. Elena was still alive that fall. Thinner than before, but steady enough for short porch evenings. She watched Patricia drive away one afternoon and said, "Dry as mesquite. That woman doesn't like unanswered invitations." Harper had laughed, and Elena had squeezed her hand. "Then keep answering with records." That line became habit too. The months that followed were full of little tests that looked harmless in isolation. Survey suggestions, beautification proposals, gentle reminders about neighborhood expectations. Patricia behaved like a woman convinced time itself would wear down resistance. Harper behaved like a woman who had spent a career waiting out pressure campaigns and checking line work twice. Back on the porch with patrol lights washing the cedar posts, Harper could feel those years stacked behind her like fence rails. Each one plain and sturdy and earned. The grief sat there with them, not softened, not theatrical, simply present. So when she watched Patricia now, heels sinking in wet soil while claiming control of ground she never owned, the feeling in Harper was not rage. It was a kind of tired clarity. Betrayal never arrives wearing fangs in places like this. It arrives with muffins, then newsletters, then language that borrows your land, one adjective at a time. Betrayal never arrived wearing fangs in places like that. It arrived with muffins, then newsletters, then language that borrowed your land, one adjective at a time. Patricia Henderson was very good at adjectives. She came the next Thursday in a white golf cart with a laminated HOA badge clipped to the windshield and swinging on every bump, as if the plastic itself carried jurisdiction. The hat was different now. Wider brim, striped ribbon. The sunglasses were bigger. The pearls stayed. She parked half on Harper's gravel and half on grass, stepped out with that white clipboard tucked under her arm, and smiled the same smile she used at the welcome table. "Just a quick courtesy follow-up," she said. "A few residents mentioned your hedge may exceed visual continuity standards." Harper stood by the porch post with a wrench in hand from tightening a loose rail bolt and answered, "My parcel isn't under your standards." Patricia tapped the clipboard anyway. Community impact still applies. Harper noticed that Patricia never asked where the line actually ran. She never asked for survey pins, never asked for recording numbers, never asked what grandfathered non-HOA meant in legal terms. She spoke in declarations and expected declarations to become reality through repetition. At county offices, Harper had seen that kind of confidence many times, usually from people who had read summaries and skipped exhibits. It was not ignorance exactly. It was incuriosity dressed up as certainty. By late October, the first courtesy note appeared in a clear plastic sleeve zip-tied to Harper's gate. View obstruction advisory. Voluntary trimming requested within 10 business days. The form had maple hollow letterhead and a blank for lot number left empty. Harper carried it to her kitchen table, logged the date and time in her incident notebook, and mailed a polite response with copies of her exemption filing, parcel map, and a one-page letter stating no HOA authority attached to Tract 17B. She sent it certified so nobody could claim confusion later. 3 days passed before the green return card came back with Patricia's signature. The next paper arrived 4 mornings later, this one labeled First Violation. It cited unauthorized hedge height and non-compliance with Scenic Corridor Maintenance Policy. The policy number referenced a subsection from Maple Hollow's internal bylaws, the same bylaws that could not reach Harper's land any more than they could reach the post office parking lot. Harper read it twice, took a photo where it hung on her gate, and filed it behind the courtesy note. Then she called the HOA management company in Tulsa and asked for their compliance officer by name. A young administrator promised review and said, careful and scripted, if your parcel is outside the association, fines would be non-collectible. That was useful. Harper wrote the call time, 2:17 p.m., and the administrator's name in her notebook. The season shifted into colder mornings and longer shadows by the first week of November, and Patricia's tone shifted with it. She stopped waving from the golf cart. She started arriving with 2 board members trailing behind, both silent men in branded quarter zips, who nodded whenever Patricia spoke and stared at their shoes when Harper asked for legal authority. One afternoon, Patricia stood at the drive entrance with her clipboard braced against her hip and announced, "You are now accruing daily penalties." Harper answered, "For rules that do not apply." Patricia smiled tightly and said, "We'll let counsel explain it when liens start." She said liens like she was saying thunder. Confident weather followed her voice. Harper did not argue. She reached into her mailbox, pulled out the certified envelope Patricia had sent, and held it up. "You got my response packet. You signed for it." Patricia shrugged. "Your packet was self-serving." Then she climbed back into the golf cart and drove off with gravel ticking against the undercarriage. That evening, Harper called Mr. Harden, the attorney who handled Barrett Land Trust matters, and read every notice to him over speakerphone while she cooked soup she had no appetite for. His scratchy voice came through with calm precision. "Keep every document. Do not discard a single envelope. Photograph placement before removal. No verbal sparring. Let her build her own record." Harper said, "She's threatening liens." Mr. Harden gave a dry little exhale. "Against exempt property, let her threaten. Paper will sort this." By Thanksgiving week, Patricia upgraded from notices to invoices. Bright orange statements appeared with line items for non-compliant hedge massing, administrative review time, and enforcement travel. One invoice charged a site inspection fee for a day Patricia had never stepped onto Harper's property. Harper almost admired the boldness of that. Almost. She scanned each page, sent the file to Mr. Harden and to the HOA management compliance address, and asked in writing whether the board had verified parcel jurisdiction before billing. 2 days later, the management company replied with a non-answer. Matter deferred to elected board discretion, pending internal interpretation. Harper printed that email and clipped it into the folder. External contact logged, outcome received, even if evasive. When winter came hard in January, Patricia started using Spectacle. She rolled up one bright Saturday morning in that same golf cart, now with a magnetic sign on the side reading HOA Field Enforcement, and stopped where 2 dog walkers from Maple Hollow could hear every word. "Last warning," she called out, voice raised for the audience. "Trim to 12 feet by Monday or we escalate." Harper was splitting kindling near the shed. She set them all down, brushed wood chips from her sleeve, and said, "You can escalate to county mapping." Patricia gave a sharp laugh. "I don't answer to county mapping. I answer to the board." She believed that sentence. That was the problem. Harper watched her drive away and noticed a strange detail she wrote down that afternoon. Patricia had highlighted a paper map in yellow marker where the old Carter pasture lot lines used to be, not where final recorded boundaries stood after subdivision approval. Old geometry, wrong geometry, used with total confidence. Distinctive detail noted. 3 days later, that detail paid off. Mr. Dalton from Lot 14, a retired electrician with a habit of speaking only when he was sure, waited at Harper's gate after dusk and said he had sat through the latest HOA meeting. He handed her a folded agenda and said, "They're using a pre-development exhibit. Not County Plat Book 62. I figured you should know. He did not ask for thanks. He just tipped his cap and walked home. Harper copied the agenda, logged his visit, and sent the image to Mr. Harden. Meaningful look resolved. Quiet neighbor accounted for. By mid-February, Patricia's escalations had become almost mechanical, each one louder than the last. First, she taped a red tag notice directly over Harper's mailbox latch. Then she mailed a certified demand threatening legal entry for corrective landscaping. Then she arrived in person with a battery trimmer in the golf cart basket, held up like a prop while she said, "If you won't maintain standards, the association will." Harper answered from the porch steps, "Any cutting on my side of the line is trespass." Patricia lifted her chin. Common view corridors supersede selfish landscaping. It was the first time she said selfish out loud. She had moved from policy language to moral language, and that always meant restraint was slipping. Rain came in for 3 straight days at the end of that month, turning shoulders soft and ditches full. On the 4th morning, Harper found fresh survey flags pulled and tossed into her gravel like confetti. She reset every flag with a mallet and took photos at each station. At 9:03 a.m., Patricia drove up and called from the cart, "Stop altering HOA markers." Harper held one orange flag between 2 fingers and said, "These are mine, set to county bearings." Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed 911 while staring right at Harper. Her words carried across the rain-cleaned air. "I need a unit for hostile non-compliance and boundary tampering. She is interfering with community safety improvements." The deputies who arrived that day were different from the ones at the wedding call, older and visibly tired, and they handled it the same way good deputies do in a paperwork war. They separated parties, asked for IDs, asked for documentation, and advised both sides to refrain from self-help measures. Harper provided exemption records from a porch folder. Patricia provided bylaw excerpts and the wrong highlighted map. One deputy looked at both stacks and said, "This appears civil unless someone damages property." Patricia answered, "Damage is ongoing by refusal." The deputy did not bite. He filed an informational report and left. External contact logged, dismissive outcome documented. By the 2nd week of March, Harper had started checking motion camera angles every evening before dark. She adjusted the driveway camera 2 degrees east to capture the full north bend where the hedge met the old corner post. She replaced one weak battery, synced timestamps across all 3 units, and tested night mode with a flashlight sweep. Not because she expected heroics, because patterns were patterns, and Patricia's pattern pointed toward doing first and justifying later. At 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, while fog still sat low over Mirror Point and the first school bus had not yet reached the highway, the camera caught exactly what Harper feared and expected. Patricia stepped out of her golf cart in pearl earrings and a rain jacket. No hat this time. Sunglasses pushed on top of stiff hair. She lifted an electric trimmer, walked straight to the hedge line, and carved a corridor in fast, horizontal passes. 42 feet by Harper's later measurement, branch tips flying, clipped limbs dragged into piles and shoved onto Harper's gravel drive as if clearing debris proved ownership. 2 HOA volunteers stood by the cart and watched. Nobody checked a line pin. Nobody knocked on Harper's door. Harper saw the footage at 6:46, seated at her kitchen table with coffee gone cold and both hands flat on the wood, while the timestamp played in the corner of the screen. She replayed it 3 times, once for disbelief, once for detail, once for chain of custody notes. Then she exported the file, saved duplicate copies to 2 drives, and called Mr. Harden at 7:02. He listened in silence as she described what the camera showed, then said, "Send original file and stills." We issue 72-hour trespass and damage notice today." His voice stayed steady, but Harper heard steel underneath it. By noon, the notice went out on firm letterhead by email and certified mail, with still images attached and explicit demand. Cease entry, cease vegetation interference, preserve records, cure damages, confirm in writing within 72 hours. Mr. Harden copied HOA management and county code enforcement. Harper printed every transmission receipt and put them in the satchel, now sitting by her rocking chair in the present morning with patrol lights flashing. Physical evidence collected, stored, and submitted. Patricia answered within 24 hours, not with correction, but with performance. She posted 2 metal signs at the new opening: Community Vista Access Lane and Event Foot Traffic This Way, both bolted into ground on Harper's side of the line. She then listed the corridor in a Maple Hollow event bulletin as part of a paid lakeside wedding package, complete with chair staging diagram and sunset photo notes. She had taken the one clear warning she was likely to get and turned it into a brochure. When Harper read that bulletin on her porch at dusk, she did not slam anything or call anyone names. She made one more entry in the notebook, underlined the date twice, and looked out over the cut hedge where wrens used to nest in April. Then she picked up her phone and left Sergeant Harlan's office a calm voicemail requesting civil standby for anticipated unlawful event encroachment on private property, with documented prior notice and video evidence available on request. 3 days passed before his dispatcher called back and confirmed units would respond if trespass was active at setup. That callback was why patrol lights were now washing red and blue across Harper's cedar porch, while Patricia stood in wet soil, pearls bright, clipboard high, insisting ownership she had never verified. Sergeant Harlan held out his hand for the folder, and Harper gave it to him without standing, the brass buckle of her satchel clicking softly as it fell back against the porch boards. Patricia leaned in immediately, one manicured finger tapping her clipboard. "Sergeant, this is delay again. Guests are arriving in less than 30 minutes. We have contracts, we have paid vendors, we have board authorization." Her voice rose on each phrase, sharp as a saw blade, while the florist crew froze by their van, with a half-built arch balanced on a dolly. Harlan did not answer her right away. He opened the top packet and read. Deputy Morrow's shoulder radio crackled, then cleared. "Unit 12, County mapping on callback. Confirm when ready for patch." Morrow glanced at Harlan, who gave a short nod. Morrow keyed up. "Ready for patch." A woman's voice came over tinny and precise from dispatch. "Mapping confirms parcel 17B, Barrett Family Tract, is grandfathered non-HOA. Repeat, non-HOA. Also confirms utility corridor and emergency turn access under Barrett Land Trust Instrument Recorded Book, 62, page 311. Sending overlay to mobile terminal now." Patricia made a dismissive sound and shook her head like she had heard a child misread a menu. "That's not current with our internal map," she said, louder than before, as if volume could outrank the county. She pulled a laminated sheet from her clipboard sleeve and thrust it toward Harlan. "This is the approved community diagram. The board voted scenic access right here." Her heels sank deeper in the wet strip near the hedge opening. The soil gave with a soft sucking sound. Harper noticed, not with pleasure, just with the detached accuracy of someone who had watched poor footing announce itself long before a fall. Harlan accepted Patricia's sheet, compared it to Harper's first page, and then turned Patricia's map sideways. "Ma'am, this header says Preliminary Concept Exhibit, dated 9 years ago." He tapped the corner with one blunt finger. "Not a recorded plat." Patricia blinked behind oversized lenses, then tightened her jaw. Recorded or not, residents rely on this access. The wedding is set, She cannot interfere now. She said she as if Harper were absent, a movable object rather than a homeowner sitting 10 feet away on her own porch. 2 SUVs rolled slowly up the lane and stopped near the entrance posts. Out stepped a wedding planner in a pale green blazer, a man carrying folded table linens, and 3 guests who had arrived early and immediately realized they had walked into a legal argument with patrol lights. One of them whispered, "Are we at the right place?" The planner checked her phone, looked at the chairs planted in Harper's side yard, and gave a strained nod that said no and yes at the same time. Patricia waved toward them with theatrical urgency. "You see? People are here. We cannot shut this down over one resident's grievance." Harper set her cup on the rail and spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. "It stopped being a grievance when you cut 42 feet of my hedge at 6:12 Tuesday morning and posted my yard as a paid access lane." Patricia swung toward her, face flushing high. "That hedge violated visual standards and blocked community frontage. I corrected it under board authority." She turned back to Harlan with a brittle smile. If she'd cooperated, we wouldn't be in this position. She wasn't afraid, not one bit. What she was committed to her own script, even after the stage started collapsing. Harlan looked to Morrow. "Pull dispatch transcript from this morning's call." Morrow scrolled on his tablet and read, careful and flat. "Complainant reports armed trespass risk. State suspect is threatening vendors with stakes. Requests urgent removal from HOA property." A small silence followed. Harper sat with both hands resting on her knees, pruning gloves folded there like a second layer of patience. The only armed thing in sight was Patricia's confidence, and that had started misfiring. "Do you see any weapon?" Harlan asked quietly. Morrow shook his head. "No, sir. Survey stakes only." Harper nodded toward the side yard. "Those stakes mark my line. I moved them back after your complainant's crew set chairs 3 feet across it." The planner in the green blazer raised a tentative hand. "Sergeant, for what it's worth, we were told this was HOA-controlled common frontage. We paid for a lake package through Maple Hollow office yesterday." Her voice trembled on the word paid. Harlan gave her a brief, reassuring nod. "You're not in trouble, ma'am. Please keep your team by your vehicles for now." Patricia snapped. "This is outrageous. You're treating elected leadership like trespassers while she sabotages a lawful event." Harlan finally faced her squarely. "Lawful depends on ownership and permit scope. And right now your documents are not matching county records." He extended his hand toward Harper. "Miss Barrett, I need the governing agreement you referenced, including revocation terms." Harper bent, drew a thick tabbed packet from the satchel, and passed it over. Her movements were unhurried, almost gentle. Years in plan review had taught her the value of clean sequence. Title page, signature page, exhibits, enforcement clause. The packet was labeled Utility and Access Master Agreement in block letters. County stamp sat in the upper right, dark blue and unmistakable. Harlan read the first 2 pages, then turned to the tab Harper had marked with yellow tape. His brow tightened, not in confusion, but in recognition. He read a line again, and then handed it to Morrow. "Read paragraph 9, aloud." Morrow cleared his throat. "License use of trust-owned pump corridor and emergency turn lane is revocable upon intentional vegetation, tampering within boundary buffers, unauthorized alteration of screening elements, or material misrepresentation of property lines to law enforcement, code officials, or permit authorities." He looked up from the page to Patricia, then back down and continued. "Upon triggering event, Access rights are suspended pending cure, damages, and written reinstatement by trust holder or counsel. Patricia laughed once, brittle and too loud. That can't apply to us. We maintain the pumps. Harper answered, calm as gravel. You maintain your pumps. You do not own the corridor that makes legal access possible. Your subdivision uses that strip under license. She nodded toward the agreement in Harlan's hand. Conditional license. Harlan flipped to the exhibit map. This red hatch line here, that's the same strip running behind your entrance beds and down to lake intake? Harper said. Yes, sir. Plus the emergency turn bulb your fire trucks use because your internal radius is tight at the cul-de-sac. Morrow pulled up the mapping overlay on his terminal, and the lines matched like transparency snapping into register. Patricia stared at the screen, then at her own laminated concept drawing, and for the first time, her posture wavered. That's technical leverage, she said weakly. You can't hold public safety hostage over landscaping. Harper's tone did not change. Public safety stays protected through temporary emergency protocol. Recreational and irrigation use pauses under Clause 9 after intentional tampering. That language was negotiated before first lot sale. Your board accepted it every year in the service acknowledgement. She tapped another tab. Page 12 has your signature block from last renewal meeting, yours and 2 board members. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. She reached for the packet, and Harlan shifted it just out of her grasp. You can review in a moment, ma'am. He turned to Harper. You mentioned camera evidence. Harper took a small flash drive from the satchel and handed it over with a printed chain of custody sheet. Motion camera North Bend. Timestamps synced across units. Original file hash noted here. Stills are attached in the notice already sent to HOA Management and County Code. Morrow plugged the drive into his tablet. The screen lit with gray morning fog, a timestamp in the corner, and Patricia stepping from her golf cart with an electric trimmer in both hands. Even without audio, intent was plain. Horizontal cuts. Reposition. Cut again. Branches dragged and piled onto Harper's gravel. 2 volunteers watching. No line check, no knock at the door, no permission. The planner in the green blazer covered her mouth. One of the early guests muttered, "Oh no." Patricia stood motionless. Clipboard pressed hard to her ribs. The red in her face drained by slow degrees until she looked as pale as the silk flowers on the arch. Harlan stopped the video and handed the tablet to Patricia. Is that you? Patricia swallowed. I was enforcing standards. Harlan took the device back. On property the county confirms is not under your standards. He nodded to Morrow. Document admission. Morrow typed. Keys clicked in the quiet. Another radio call came through from dispatch, this time code enforcement. Morrow listened, then relayed. County Code reviewed event permit number MH4472 filed by Maple Hollow. Permit references common HOA frontage parcel C2. Mapping confirms event setup currently sits outside C2 boundary on private tract 17B. Code marks permit void at location. Harlan looked toward the rows of white chairs and the half-built arch. All event equipment needs to be removed from this yard now. Patricia took one step forward, voice cracking for the first time all morning. You cannot do this to us today. There are deposits, families, photographers, catering trucks on the way. Harper met her gaze without heat. You did this when you sold my side yard as a venue? The sentence landed plain and heavy, like a gate closing. Harlan addressed Patricia in formal cadence. Ma'am, at this point you are being instructed to leave this parcel and direct all vendors off private property. Any further entry without permission may be cited as trespass. A false report supplemental will be forwarded for review based on your call content and available evidence. Do you understand? Patricia's lips trembled around a reply that did not come. She gave a single stiff nod. Harper spoke to the planner, not unkindly. If you move your chairs 20 yards east onto your recorded common area, you can salvage your ceremony view. I have no interest in ruining a couple's day. The planner exhaled in visible relief and immediately started directing her crew. Vendors moved fast now, lifting, folding, carrying, wheels rattling over gravel. Work replaced spectacle. Patricia remained where she was for a moment longer, heels muddy, pearls bright, clipboard suddenly just plastic and paper. Morrow stepped aside to give her a clear path back to the lane. She turned without another word and walked toward her golf cart, while phones in the small crowd lowered one by one. No shouting now. No declarations. Just the scrape of chair legs being loaded and the soft lake wind moving through a damaged hedge that would, with time and proper care, grow thick again. The moment Patricia's golf cart rattled off the gravel and out past the entrance stones. Sergeant Harlan stepped back onto the porch and handed Harper a yellow carbon sheet with an incident number written in block print. "Keep this with your file," he said. "Body cam pull request is already in. Code and mapping attachments will be linked by end of day." His tone stayed procedural, but his eyes held steady on hers a second longer than necessary. The way people do when they are quietly acknowledging somebody held a line without making a show of it. Harper nodded and took the sheet. "Thank you for running the records instead of the volume." Harlan gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Records usually win." He turned to Deputy Morrow. "Get statements from planner, both set-up contractors and the 2 HOA volunteers in the video." Then he looked back to Harper. "Your flash drive stays with evidence tech for duplication. You'll get a receipt." Morrow returned 10 minutes later with a printed property receipt and a case supplement form for her signature. Harper signed once, dated once, and kept a copy in the satchel with the camera hash log. Physical evidence transferred, logged, and accounted for. By 11:40 that morning, after the last white chair left her grass and the florist van finally rolled away, Harper stood at her kitchen counter with Mr. Hardin on speaker and the utility agreement open to paragraph 9. The house still smelled faintly of damp cedar and cut greenery. "Read me your requested remedy language," Mr. Hardin said. Harper read from her notebook. "Immediate suspension of non-emergency corridor use, rights pending cure. Emergency fire flow preserved under temporary protocol. Restitution for hedge destruction based on mature replanting estimate. Survey monument installation at violator expense. Withdrawal of all HOA fines and written correction to membership." "Good," Hardin said. Papers shuffled on his end. "We add personal notice to Ms. Henderson for intentional trespass and false report costs where provable. We also request injunctive relief, barring board members from entering Tract 17B absent written permission." Harper glanced out the window at the open gap in the hedge. "Make sure the management company gets copied this time with attachments and incident number." "They already are," he said. "And Ms. Barrett, one more thing. The wrong highlighted concept map she used on scene is now Exhibit F. It helps us establish reckless misrepresentation, not confusion." That detail had bothered Harper since winter. Hearing it named out loud felt like setting a tool back in its rightful drawer. 3 days later, at 8:03 a.m., Maple Hollow's entrance sprinklers stayed dry while the neighborhood beds browned in first heat. By design, not by spite. Harper had signed the suspension letter exactly as the agreement required, and Mr. Hardin had delivered it by certified mail, email, and hand service to the management office. Emergency fire flow access remained active under county-monitored protocol, but irrigation and non-essential corridor use paused until damages and compliance were complete. The irony did not need narration. Patricia's board had spent years citing community standards while depending on water rights granted by the woman they called non-compliant. At 9:17 that same morning, Harper's phone rang. HOA Management, Tulsa number. A clipped male voice introduced himself as Regional Director. Ms. Barrett, we received council's suspension notice and supporting media. We are instructing Maple Hollow Board to cease all direct contact with you pending legal review. Harper sat at her table, pen ready. What about the fines already issued? A pause. Keyboard sounds. All charges tied to your parcel are rescinded effective immediately. Written correction will go out to residents by close of business. And the posted Vista signs on my side? Removal crew is scheduled for this afternoon with no member attendance. We'll send photo confirmation. External contact resolved. She wrote time, name, and commitments in her notebook and underlined each one once. The injunction hearing landed the following Thursday in a small county courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old paper. Patricia sat at counsel table in a navy suit and no sunglasses, hands clasped hard enough to blanch her knuckles. Without the golf cart and clipboard, she looked smaller, though not softer. Mr. Harden stood and walked the judge through exhibits in clean sequence. Maintenance logs, survey records, camera footage certification, dispatch transcript language, permit void notice, and the pre-development concept map Patricia had presented as current authority. When the video played, the room stayed quiet except for the hum of the projector fan. Patricia did not look up. The judge granted temporary injunction on entry and interference, ordered restitution escrow for mature hedge replacement, and directed Maple Hollow to fund permanent survey monuments at all disputed edge points. Then he looked over his glasses at Patricia. Board position is not a substitute for title. You are personally on notice. Harper did not react in the courtroom. She just capped her pen and slid it into her bag. 2 nights later came the board meeting at the clubhouse. Harper did not attend by choice. Mr. Dalton from Lot 14 called at 8:52 p.m., voice low and matter-of-fact. Thought you should know, they voted. 5-2 to remove Henderson as president, effective tonight. Interim chair appointed. They read management's compliance letter out loud. Harper thanked him and asked one question. Did they mention the map? They did, he said. Said it was never supposed to be used for enforcement. Half the room went dead quiet. He paused. For what it's worth, a lot of us were tired of the theater. Loaded look resolved, at last. He had known more than he said months ago. Now he said it plain. On Monday morning, a contractor crew arrived at Harper's gate with boxed bronze survey caps, concrete mix, and a stamped layout from county mapping. One foreman, sunburned and respectful, held up the work order. Paid by Maple Hollow HOA, ma'am. We set and photograph every monument, then file is built by noon. Harper walked the line with them, boot to boot, while they drilled, set, and sealed each marker flush and permanent. At the north bend, where the trimmer had first bitten, she crouched and pressed her thumb to the warm bronze cap after the concrete set. Solid, visible, indisputable. By the end of that week, every physical thread in her satchel had a destination. The flash drive came back from evidence with certification letter attached. Camera originals remained archived on 2 labeled drives in her firebox. Certified mail receipts were clipped to council filings. The pulled survey flags, dried and dirt-stained, were tagged and noted as retained, but no longer needed for proof after monument installation. Patricia's wrong map was admitted as Exhibit F and then copied into final order attachments. Nothing loose, nothing dangling. 6 weeks after the patrol lights washed her porch, Harper stepped out just after sunrise with fresh coffee and the same old rocking chair creak greeting her like an old dog. The replanted hedge stood in a clean, straight run where 42 feet had been cut open, young but sturdy. Roots wrapped weeks earlier by a nursery crew paid from restitution escrow. They had matched species and spacing to her maintenance logs, down to the shelter pockets near North Bend where wrens liked to nest. A county fire inspector met her at the gate that morning for final protocol sign-off. He checked pressure notes, signed the temporary emergency memo closed, and handed her a single-page confirmation that full pump corridor rights were reinstated after HOA payment and compliance completion. "Everything's back to normal operations," he said. Harper folded the page. "Normal with clearer lines?" He tipped his cap. "Best kind." At 10:05, the interim HOA chair, a tired accountant named Leslie Moore, arrived alone in a pickup instead of a golf cart. No pearls, no performance, just a folder and an apologetic posture. "Miss Barrett," she said, standing at the bottom step. "I'm here to deliver board acknowledgement, proof of payment, and written notice that Ms. Henderson has completed court-ordered penalties and is barred from representing the association in any external matter." Harper accepted the folder and scanned the signatures. "Thank you for bringing it yourself." Leslie exhaled. "We're trying to run this like paperwork now, not theater." "That'll help," Harper said. Leslie hesitated, then added, "For the record, no one on the current board will contact you except through counsel on corridor maintenance scheduling. We're done with fines, done with invented jurisdictions." "Good," Harper said, and meant it. After Leslie left, the lane grew quiet again. No engines idling, no radios, no raised voices from the road. Just wind in pine branches and the soft click of the rocker as Harper settled back with her coffee. A pair of wrens flicked in and out of the new hedge, testing branches. The lake beyond Mirror Point lay calm and silver in the morning light, unchanged by meetings, filings, or titles, patient as ever. She took the sticky note with Elena's blue ink reminder from her pocket, smoothed it once against her knee, and tucked it back into the satchel now stored beside the chair instead of braced for battle. Her goal had never been to conquer a neighborhood. It had been to keep her boundary true, her records clean, and her home intact. On that porch, with survey caps set, reports closed, rights restored, and no unresolved calls left waiting, peace felt less like victory and more like proper alignment. Harper rocked once, then again, and watched morning settle over land that was still hers.